Right, so where once we on the left were saying repeatedly to people endlessly to vote Labour to save the NHS, that boat has now firmly sailed. After 13 years of the Tories vandalising the service, underfunding it and privatising the profitable bits where the NHS used to make some money themselves out of it, selling them off, putting them out to tender to the highest bidder so those profits ended up in the pockets of the already wealthy, Labour now won't put that into reverse because apparently we can't afford it. You see, the bought and paid for by private health interest shadow health minister and ultra Starmer loyalist Wes Streeting is instead blaming the service itself, and not for the first time. He has said in no uncertain terms there will be no extra money for the NHS, that we can have a properly funded NHS or we can deal with something else like child poverty, but we can't have both. He has accused the NHS of being complacent and that there is simply no money to put into the service due to the Tories' damage to the economy. Yet another politician who doesn't understand economics then. Streeting has been his usual rude, obnoxious, intensely dislikable self on the media rounds and is telling us that our health service, which Labour created, won't be rescued by him or what passes for the Labour Party of today, even going so far as to refer to spending on it as unsustainable. Will it actually end up being the Labour Party that ends up destroying the NHS, in which case? Right, so Wes Streeting, as regular viewers of this channel will know, is right up there in the Damo thinks there are wrong and stakes, and is in no small part that due to the man's dislikable nature, his craven loyalty to Keir Starmer, as awful as he is, and just the fact he's a whopping great red Tory. The endless supply of bullshit that he spouts on these media rounds, you'd honestly think he was a cattle farmer with the amount of it he's got to shovel around, and nothing quite shows that than when he is talking about the NHS, or rather, talking it down. Young Wesley is threatening NHS reform, you see, folks. As if we haven't seen enough of that under the Tories. It has been reformed into a shadow of its former self. Bits and pieces sold off, leaving just the less profitable bits, the emergency medicine, the NHS we all need in an emergency, as the underfunded, uncared for part. Streeting is saying that reform is needed because spending has become unsustainable. It's not the NHS itself that is unsustainable, though, of course. It is the profiteering out of all the stuff that got sold off that is unsustainable. So what has Wesley said then, Damo? Well, he was doing the media rounds this Sunday, so let's start with his turn on LBC. He said that he felt there was complacency in the NHS, and that for many people they think that the service just needs more money. This is his anxiety about it, apparently. He's anxious about the NHS needing more money. And we're all anxious about the NHS not getting more money, aren't we? Well, the NHS does need more money. We all know that. We know the service is being underfunded. And we also know that this is an intentional thing. You know, just think about the inflation we've seen in the economy since the pandemic. The pandemic where our health workers were called heroes, remember? Banging on our pots and pans, clapping for them on our doorsteps, whilst they saved our lives. And the Tories spent billions not on the service, but in dodgy PPE rackets instead. The millions the likes of Michelle, don't hate me, I'm really the victim here, moan got away with. With inflation having passed 10% at one point and higher, and many of us needing help with energy bills, the NHS average year-on-year funding increase since 2010, which means before and throughout that time, was an average of just a pathetic 1.4%, down from an average of 3.7%, which is also ridiculously low. So way, way behind the rate of inflation, which of course is the rate at which prices of stuff increases. Inflation fell, but that only means prices are rising more slowly. Therefore, the NHS still needs more money, just like everything else. So Streeting saying the NHS is complacent and throwing money at it in and of itself isn't the answer is also insultingly simplistic and treating us all for fools. Money is needed to invest in the next generation of health workers. If you invest it wisely in the NHS, you will get a bigger return. So many of whom we've lost, staff-wise, thanks to burnout and also Brexit, when so many foreign health workers went home, remember. And the NHS has always relied on foreign workers, always, ever since it was created. We never, ever have trained enough in this country, and that is still the case. Labour saying they will do it now. Well, how without the investment? Growth? This mysterious, nebulous growth you're going to get without investment? Come off it. You have to be daft to believe that. The financial incentives to go into health work are equally not there either, with wages depressed, meaning a recruitment crisis is also present. Too few nurses, too few midwives, too few doctors, too few paramedics coming into the service or being retained. Again, we can point to the Tories here, choosing to inflict minimum staffing levels which were already in place in the health service anyway, impacting their ability to strike though. That was the whole purpose of them. All of this stuff is stuff Streeting could be calling out. Instead, he's agreeing with what the Tories are saying on the NHS. He's just blaming the NHS for it, before then arriving at the same conclusion, which, when this should be his brief, when this is his brief, and he should be fighting for that funding, he's already getting his excuses in before Labour even get elected into government. Sure, he's blaming the Tories, but he's blaming them for trashing the economy as the reason he won't fight for investment in the NHS, that there is no money for it. In regards to not being able to give the NHS more money, he said there are two reasons for that, or two theories, as he put it to Matthew Wright on LBC. He said, one is that the Conservatives have crashed the public finances so that I can't promise that if we come in there will be loads more cash to splash around. Secondly, NHS spending as a proportion of day-to-day government spending is now over 40%, about 42%. I don't think that percentage can go much higher without the NHS looking unsustainable. This is Starmer's Labour to a T though. Blame the Tories and then change nothing. Just carry on with what they were doing anyway that you're blaming them for. On the first point, he's showing he's as clueless as Keir Starmer is on how the economy works, or being as dishonest about it. There is no shortage of money because the government literally prints what it needs. If it wanted to fund the NHS properly, it could, overnight. It simply requires typing the numbers into a computer at the Bank of England and creating it. To avoid runaway inflation, you implement a brake on that inflation at the same time. That is what we call taxation. We know the majority of those in work are taxed too highly, and those with all the wealth barely at all as a proportion. The one thing this country does need to see massively reformed, and yet we never do get it reformed, is the tax system, because the wrong people are paying too much of their incomes as a proportion of taxation, and other people are not paying nearly enough. If you tax the right people, you can spend the money. Now, the Tories hate that sort of ideology, this tax and spend thinking. They think it bizarre and unworkable, but that is only because they desperately want you to compare the national finances to how your own household budget works, and they are not the same. You cannot print money. You would be arrested for that. That isn't true of the government, though. So the money is always there, first and foremost. They can simply create it. On Streeting's second point, the proportion of day-to-day spending on the NHS at 40 to 42% not being sustainable. Well, why is it not sustainable? What else do you want to spend this money on? Oh, that's right. You all want to bring austerity back, don't you? You want to slash spending across the board. Carry on shrinking the state like good little Tories. Nothing like Labour. The lack of investment in the NHS is crippling it, though, and Streeting is basically saying he'd carry on with it, and he's defending the fact he would carry on with it. We have 130,000 vacancies in the NHS. If you don't invest, you can't recruit and you can't retain. It is government investment, government putting money in that does that. Not taxes, not taxpayers' money, of which there's no such thing. Government will, and you aren't willing if you get into power. Let's not forget, though, that every time Streeting gets pulled up on this, he then extols the virtues of the NHS and how they saved his life when he had cancer. A pity he won't return the favour in which case, but then this is what Tories do. I've never forgotten how David Cameron used to use his own disabled son as a reason to say he wasn't going after the disabled. But we all know austerity killed thousands of disabled and long-term sick people. It's a simple matter of fact now. On funding, however, Streeting went even further over on the BBC with Laura Koonsberg, because apparently every penny extra that goes into the NHS is at the expense of other worthy causes. Again, implying the government is unable to produce the money when it wants to, which is a lie. He said, every penny that we put into the NHS comes at the expense of other worthy causes, whether child poverty reductions, spending in schools, crime and policing, or putting money back into the pockets of hard-pressed families. Every penny put in, not penny extra. Note the wording he used. Again, it has to be said, this is his future brief if he gets into government, his future department. And instead of fighting for more funding, he seems to be fighting to fund every other department instead of his own. Worse, he made the implication that you can have a well-funded NHS or kids in poverty. We can't fix both of them. That will cost too much. Well, yes, you damn well can, if you choose to. It's always political will. And you're telling the entire country you haven't got any. All it says to me is that Starmer's lot, not that this is going to be news to anyone following the rancid man's politics, are not prepared to do what must be done and invest to get this country back on its feet and undo the harm to people's lives that the Tories have been causing for the last 13 years. It is the height of economic idiocy to not invest in the health of the nation, when it ultimately leads to us all being less prepared for the next pandemic, more people becoming ill and being off work for longer, waiting on treatment or operations and the like. The backlog goes on, all of it having an economic knock-on effect. If you fix the NHS, you get an economic return. This is established fact. It really is that simple. For every £1 invested in the NHS, the Exchequer gets roughly £4 back in return. It's economic and clinical idiocy to not invest in the NHS, and Streeting is going to make every excuse going to say Labour can't or won't do it. So what exactly is the point of voting for them if you value the NHS? Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where even kids are onto Streeting as they boycotted a visit by him to a school in his own constituency recently. So what excuse do you have then for not boycotting him with your vote? And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.